Hello and a very big and warm welcome to you. My name is Andrew and I'm here as the Urban Penguin, and we're going to be taking a look at the sudoers configuration, how we can configure and delegate control of our system to different users and groups. Now, as you know, on YouTube you can leave comments, and please do leave comments. It's these comments that we do listen to, and recently somebody asked that we cover in more detail aliases and the sudoers configuration files. So this is what we're going to take a look at today. So hello and a big warm welcome to the command line, a command line on an Ubuntu 20.04 server, but to be honest, it shouldn't really matter which Linux distribution you are using, because we're looking at the configuration of the sudoers file, and that's going to be consistent across all of your Linux distributions. I've logged in as the Vagrant user. This is on a Vagrant virtual machine. And by default, we have the ability to run everything with sudo. I can show you this with sudo -L to list the permissions that I have been granted. Now, as we take a look, we've got our matching default, the entries that we can pick up. But we start reading it is for the user Vagrant on the Ubuntu One host. Then we can go through and see the main second entry is that the user Vagrant may run the following commands on Ubuntu One. So we're able to sudo as all users. We don't need to specify a password, and we can run all commands. Hence, when I run sudo -L, I didn't have to put in my own password. The emphasis is that you have to put in your password, not the target password, so we don't have to be worried about divulging the root password to all of our administrators. The other advantage is we don't have to give all commands. We can choose precisely which commands we delegate and to whom. And that's all configured through our sudoers configuration. This is a private file, so if I try and cat it out without using the sudo command, we're going to get permission denied. So etc sudoers. And sure enough, permission is denied. So what do we have to do? We have to put sudo in front of it. The easiest way to do that is use sudo and exclamation mark, exclamation mark. So we run exactly the same command, but this time with sudo in front of it. Now we can see on an Ubuntu system, this is a relatively small file. On a Red Hat system, you might find it's more intensely commented. We don't particularly need it to be commented because we can look at the man page. But the important thing here is just looking at the last entry, the include directive, and it's including the extension directory, etc and sudoers.d. It's generally going to be that file that we make changes to. We also should be making the changes through the visudo command. If we take a look inside of the sudoers.d directory, there will be a file called Vagrant for my Vagrant user, and this is where I'm getting my configuration from, for the user Vagrant, running on all hosts. That's all hosts where this sudoers file is located. Now we've got all, and that means then I can use the one sudoers file, the one Vagrant file in this case, across all of my hosts. And that's going to work well so long as Vagrant needs the same permissions on all of those hosts. I can, though, put individual host names. The equal, we can go through and specify who they're allowed to sudo as, or we could sudo to all users, although often I think root would be enough. And then finally, we've got a list of commands. But my command list is prefaced with no passwd and then all. So I can run all commands, but I don't have to put my password in for any of the commands. So that makes it really, really simple, doesn't it? Not necessarily the most secure, but very easy, so we don't have to put in our password. But we want to look at editing and making changes to this file. And I say, if we're going to make changes to this file, we should be using the visudo command. The visudo command will do a syntax check. So come on then, let's be brave. Let's go through and open up our file. So sudo and visudo. If I use it without any options or argument, it's going to open up the default file /etc/sudoers. But when we look at the comments, first of all, it tells me we should be editing this with visudo. As I said before, this then gives me a syntax check. If I save a file that's not configured properly, then it can break the complete sudoers system. It also tells me don't add to this file, edit files in the sudoers.d directory. The idea of that, if we get an update to the package sudo, it could then overwrite the sudoers file, losing all of our changes. So that's what we're going to do. We're not going to make any changes to this file. We're going to open up a new configuration file inside of etc and sudoers.d. So having closed that file, we didn't need to save any of our changes because we didn't make changes. And we're then going to go through an up arrow key so we get back to the same command we were running before. But we're now going to change it slightly. We're going to put the -f option in. With the -f option, we're looking at specifying the file that we want to edit. The included directory is etc sudoers.d. So if we go through then and specify that we want to edit, we're just going to call it mysudo here. If the file doesn't exist, it will be created. So for me, this is going to create a brand new file called mysudo. And we'll look then at the syntax, what we put into our sudoers file. And it makes no difference whether this is the etc sudoers file or the extension directory that we're using here. If we have an operating system group, we specify groups using %. So %users means that we're using an operating system group, the users group inside of our Linux operating system. We can specify all. So this is then specifying that on all hosts that we place this configuration on, it's going to apply to the users group. So on which hosts are we applying this configuration? So it does mean that we can share this configuration file across all of our servers. Next, we go through and put the equal, and then we need to go in and put our round brackets in, our parentheses, and we're saying who we can sudo as. And we can say that we can sudo as the root user. Then we specify the commands, and this is a list of commands that they are able to run. I can preface, as we saw before, with no password, WD, but if I just go through and put them in, then we're going to have to put in our password. So usr bin mount, we'll allow them to run the mount command, and then we comma separate our entries, and we can say that maybe we're allowed to run the umount command. So usr/bin/umount. So anybody who's in the users group are going to be able to mount and unmount file systems. We can put arguments as well, so we can restrict them, perhaps from unmounting the root file system. But for the moment, we'll just put this simple entry in. And that's going to apply to all members of the group users. As well as using the built-in host alias called all, we can create our own host aliases to group hosts together. But it must be written like this in mixed case, host_alias in mixed case. The alias name must be in uppercase. So we can think of then of a name we want to assign, and we might then have, I don't know, maybe for web servers, we can call the host alias www. This is really a host group. We can then specify equals, so we can specify the hosts that belong to this alias. And again, it's going to be a comma separated list. So we can show that it's working. We can include our Ubuntu One host. We can go through and include maybe another host. Whether it exists or not, it doesn't matter, but we'll put www1. So we've got ways of grouping our hosts together. We don't particularly need a space to separate, but it probably reads better if we space separate the entries. Now, as well as creating a host aliases, rather than writing all of our commands out, we might create command aliases. Again, the syntax for this is very specific, with a mixed case and then an uppercase name for the command alias. And we'll call it HELPDESKCMD for our help desk commands. What we don't want are alias names to clash. Again, we use the equal sign. We're getting used to this now. And the equal sign then will precede our list of members. But this is going to be a list of commands. So we can go through and put then our usr bin and maybe our passwd command. Remember, we comma separate our entries. We want to run the password command, but we don't want to allow people to run the password command and specifying the root account. We don't want people to change the root user's password. So we can specify not usr bin passwd. So say we can also supply the command and what options we're allowed to use or not allowed. We're negating it here by using the exclamation mark in front of our command. With that done and dusted, we might also want our users to be able to create new users, so we can put usr sbin useradd. Now, for this to work seamlessly, the sbin directory must be in your user's search path, or they have to put in the full path to the command. Now, this is just a host alias and a command alias that we've created. We haven't assigned this to anyone. We can do that to individual users, to our operating system groups. But if we don't have an operating system group, we can create our own groups in the form of user aliases inside of our configuration. So we can go through and put in our user underscore alias. Again, we're getting used to the mixed case on that. We're going to call the alias helpdesk. And then we can add our users into this. Again, the users don't need to exist at this stage. We'll end up creating the users later. So I'm going to have user 1 and user 2. They're going to be members of the helpdesk user alias. So they can pick up anything that's assigned to the helpdesk user alias. Now, again, as yet, we haven't made any assignment to helpdesk. But we can easily do that with helpdesk being our user alias. We can then go through and put in our host alias, but instead of using all, we can specify www equals. We can sudo as root. And we can then go through and specify which commands. But you've guessed it, we're going to put in our command alias, HELPDESKCMD. So our entry becomes a lot more simple because we can make use of the aliases that we've created. Our user alias, our host alias, and our command alias. Now again, we haven't prefaced the commands with no password, so our users are going to be prompted for their own password before they're able to run these commands. I can go through and save my change, and it will have done the syntax check, and that's really important because there is a misconfigured sudoers file. It will break sudo. So if I go through and remove the equals, maybe put an X in its place, go through and save the change, then we can see the syntax check throws up this question, what now? Hit the enter key, and we've got two correct options, edit and exit. Either of those are good. The bottom option, I feel, shouldn't even be there because that will break your sudoers system. So if we quit, we're saving what we now know as an incorrect file. We should never, ever choose quit. It's marked as dangerous, but we should really read it as being quite unforgiving. So we're going to choose edit or exit. So I'm using E for edit As we then go through, I can fix up my typo, put the equals back in, save my change. Again, the syntax check is still going to be running when we save it, but it shouldn't pick up any errors now, so we are good to go. But it is very, very important that we never choose that bottom option. Now, I don't actually have that user account user1, but it's not a problem to create it. Let's go through quickly create it. So sudo useradd will explicitly create their home directory. I'll set their shell. On Ubuntu, we use a simple Bourne shell, where we want to set for a more usable bash shell. We can also go through and set their group membership to include the users group. Remember, I assigned user1 both to the alias and the users group. And we can then go through and set the username to user1. Now, if we're uncertain what we had configured, there's nothing stopping me going back and taking a look. So %users, and we can see in our user aliases, we're then using user1 and user2 within our help desk group. So, of course, there's nothing stopping us going back and checking what we've created is correct. So we can pick up rights granted to the operating system group users as well as our user alias help desk. We can look at setting the password. Now, there are many ways that we can set the password, but one way is to go through and echo the user account name and the password that we want to set and pipe that through, pipe with a vertical bar, through to sudo and passwd. With this way, we don't have to enter our password twice and becomes a great way that we can set through scripts. So as I hit the big enter key here, the password is now set and we don't need to worry about the normal interaction if we use the passwd command. I can swap to that user account now. Just to save me having to put the password in when I first change it, let's do a sudo su-user1. So I'm now running as user1. And we're able then to use sudo -L to check what we're allowed to do. Now, the first thing, notice we're being prompted for the password. So this is the user1 password that we've just set. And we can then go through and see that user1 may on the following commands on Ubuntu 1. So mount and umount, that's coming from the users group. From the helpdesk alias, we've got the password and useradd commands. So everything is really looking good. There is also a 5-minute cache on the sudo password to make life just a little bit more simple. So if I go through now and do a sudo and useradd user2, I'm not being prompted for the password. We're inside of that 5-minute period. If I do a sudo and passwd for user2, I can't use password. We haven't given the permissions to run password. I can then enter the new password that I want for user2. Obviously, I've got to enter it twice through the interaction. But remember, we said that we weren't allowed to change the password for the root user. Well, go on, let's try. See what happens. The computer says no. We're not allowed to change the root user's password. So hopefully we can see a little bit more about how this goes together. But if we go back and take a look at our sudo file that we created, we can run through Control and R to reverse search. I'm just doing vis for visudo. That's the correct command that I want, so I can hit enter on that, and it's going to open up my sudo configuration, and we can review what we had created. So our users groups are allowed to run the mount and umount command. We created our alias for our hosts, the alias for the commands, the alias for the users, and then our last line is assigning permissions. And I really hope you found this useful and has opened up some ideas about how you can configure sudo in your own environment.
All that is left to say is thank you for watching. If you've enjoyed this, then you are probably sadder than I first thought. For more of this drivel, please subscribe, like and comment to @TheUrbanPenguin.